This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we believe prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. I'm your host, Steve Miller. This is episode 49, and in today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jennifer White. She is the founder and executive director of ICTSOS. The organization has been the recipient of local, state, and national recognition, including the Volunteer Leadership Group Award from the National Children's Alliance and the Directors Community Leadership Award from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Jennifer also serves on the Human Trafficking Advisory Board for the Kansas Attorney General's Office, as well as the Human Trafficking Working Group for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Jennifer is a lifelong Wichitan, mom of two amazing kids, and a huge fan of tacos and Mr. Rogers. Before we get into the content, we would like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Well, welcome to the podcast, Jennifer White. So glad to have you here with us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, we always like to give the audience a little bit of a background through the Mid-America PTTC. We do a lot of work in the realm of prevention, and we think a lot about how did we as each individual end up on this path of prevention, and realizing that the work that you do is kind of straddles prevention and also the other side of trying to help or rescue those that are in human trafficking. But can you give us a little bit of a background on your path into prevention?
Yeah, so I am the founder and executive director of our organization, neither of which was planned. I kind of came into some knowledge of the issue of human trafficking in 2011 through some things that sort of hit the media in our area, some local cases and things. And I always say I'm nosy and I'm bossy. And so I started just kind of reaching out to, first the reporter that wrote one of the pieces, and then connected with some local organizations, and really just trying to learn for my own knowledge. I have two kiddos and that I'm raising in this community. And, I was just trying to kind of wrap my head around what this issue really looked like here. And, to make a really long story short, we started very grassroots. Myself and a couple other people started doing some donation drives and trying to plug into volunteers some places and things like that. And what we saw snowball really quickly was that there just was a need for an avenue for community members to get engaged, but in a way that was safe and organized and partnered with the professionals. And so, over the course of the next few years, we got a little more organized, became a 501c3 nonprofit, and eventually started going into the schools. As I was learning and bringing people together, we would bring in, maybe a detective one week, or, maybe the next week we would bring in a forensic nurse or a social worker to kind of educate this group of citizens that was getting bigger and bigger. Eventually, I started getting asked to go and speak to, churches or book clubs or, things like that. People would say, well, we know that you've been digging into this information about human trafficking. Will you come and talk to us about what you're learning? And so from there, then the next question I started getting asked is anybody talking to our kids about this? We know that nationally, the average age of first entry into a trafficking or prostitution type situation tends to be about 12 to 14. And so, that was a concern for people. If that's where this is starting for kids, is anybody talking to kids about what this looks like? And so in 2014, I believe, we partnered with an organization out of DC at the time to use their curriculum to start going into schools. And there was a whole process there to kind of get through all of that and build those relationships and start going into the classroom. And then through the pandemic, the last couple of years, obviously we had to step back from being physically in the classroom for a while. And so what we were able to do was work with a local film company to create some film content that now we use in our curriculum and go into middle and high school classrooms. So here in our city, we are approved at the district level for the Wichita School District, which is the largest school district in the state. We fit into the human growth and development curriculum, and we can go into any middle school or high school. And we serve a lot of the outlying school districts as well, but Wichita is definitely the largest. So that's kind of how I got to the point where we're providing some prevention education.
Well, it's much needed, and those that follow the Mid Americas podcast and the work that we do are one of our areas of focus is on drug endangered children, and that's where you and I crossed paths was at the Kansas DEC conference recently. And so I think that it would be interesting to kind of draw that correlation, because when we talk about, drug endangered children, we're talking in most people's minds, we're talking about, drug exposure, trafficking, use, maybe manufacturing, grows, those kinds of things, and trying to, unify the family and get some recovery and support in those areas. But then there's this component that you recognize and in your work also with human trafficking. What is that correlation? I mean, how is it that drug endangered children and human trafficking are they're interrelated in some ways?
So I think the big thing for people to understand is that human trafficking is a much broader issue than people think. People a lot of times have a very narrow view of what they think trafficking is. So, for example, a lot of people think of the movie Taken, right? Where you think about this happening overseas, where somebody gets, snatched, and then hopefully Liam Neeson comes to rescue them. But what we're talking about when we're talking about the definition of trafficking is with youth, it's any exchange of anything of a sexual nature for anything of value. So that exchange does not have to be for money. If we think about, maybe a kiddo that is exchanging some sort of sexual activity for drugs, if we think about a parent who is exchanging somebody else having a sexual relationship with their child in exchange for drugs for the parent, that's trafficking. Any kind of an exchange. And unfortunately, we see trafficking happening within the context of families way more than people would think. A lot of trafficking survivors are introduced to a drug habit by a trafficker as a means of control. If I can get you hooked on something and I'm your supplier, guess what? That's one more way that I can control getting you to do what I want you to do. A lot of survivors have children with their trafficker. So all of that gets very intermingled very quickly. We've got kiddos then that are, growing up in environments where, maybe a parent is being trafficked, there's drugs in the home, people are coming and going that are not safe for that kiddo, that are also engaged in that drug activity, crossed over with the trafficking activity. It all gets very, very intertwined very quickly.
So you say that this happens a lot more frequently than people would be aware of. So if it were to increase my awareness, what is something that someone might go, that seems out of the ordinary, or after hearing, Jennifer talk about this, two things. What is it I'm seeing? And two, if I think that's what I'm seeing, is this a 911 call or is this a call to some other agency?
Yeah. So I'll address your first question first, as far as kind of what to look for. Definitely there are things that, should throw up a red flag. So thinking about, businesses and things like that, if there are people coming and going in a way that, doesn't seem normal. We see this a lot with massage parlors, things like that. So much of trafficking is facilitated online now, that it's not necessarily concentrated in one area or, that part of town anymore, in any community. So just being aware of things like, if you're staying in a hotel and you see a 15 or 16-year-old girl in the hotel lobby late at night by themselves, and that kind of makes you think, why is this kid here by themselves? There may be something going on there. Watching for things, especially with youth, things like missing a lot of school, running with an older crowd, a kid that suddenly has newer, nicer things than they've had before, where maybe somebody is buying them gifts or giving them things as part of a grooming process, new technology. Maybe this kid all of a sudden has a second cell phone. Things like that would definitely be things to look for. And then as far as reporting goes, yes, with kids, this is a mandated report. If you're a mandated reporter, if you're a teacher, a coach, or in a church or anything like that, you can definitely call 911. You can also report it through the Department of Children and Families if you have a suspicion, things like that. There's a national human trafficking hotline you can report things to if somebody's not sure, or maybe they just think, man, I really wish somebody would just kind of follow up on this. This business seems a little sketchy. Somebody should probably look into that. I think maybe this kid is not in a safe situation. Somebody needs to look into that. I always tell people to err on the side of reporting, because if it's nothing, it's nothing. But you may be the only person that recognizes what's happening with this kiddo. So for example, thinking about the fact that, this doesn't necessarily look like what we think. We're not seeing things like, kids being grabbed out of parking lots in the white van and things like that. Like I said, we see this happen within families. It's usually somebody that is known to the victim or that has built a relationship with the victim. So a few years ago in one of our schools, after we had been in a classroom for 3 or 4 days doing prevention education with a group, we had a young lady come up to us at the end and she said, "This is not happening to me, but I think based on some of the things that we've been talking about, this sounds very similar to a situation that my friend is in." She said, "I know she's not in a safe situation, but I haven't really been able to kind of figure out how to tell somebody because I don't really know what to tell them." Mm-hmm. But this kind of matches some of the things that it seems like are going on with her. And long story short, this girl's older brother, the friend, her older brother had been pimping her out to his friends. So he would come pick her up after school. He would drive her around to wherever he had set up, quote unquote dates for her. She would have to have sex with somebody. He would collect the drugs or money or whatever they were paying with. And then when they got done, they'd go home. She'd take a shower, do her homework, and go right back to school the next day. So the fact that her friend recognized some changes in her patterns, some changes in her behavior, some things that she was saying, that really helped her friend be able to identify, hey, this is what's going on. And we were able to get her out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. So I know that in one of the stories that you shared when you spoke at the conference, you kind of indicated that some of the victims repeatedly from interactions. Are we talking about, especially when it comes back to, let's say, maybe they do have somebody that's their pimp or whatever the terminology would be, but is there is this a case where maybe the kids are running away as well, or they're trying to get away from the family? Or, I mean, I in my mind, I think are these young people, children, essentially, they're on the streets, like homeless because of family, because of the drug use in the family, just they can't tolerate it? I mean, is it any and all the above?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Any and all of the above. Yeah. So tying this back to, thinking about drug endangered children. So a kiddo that, home is chaotic. There's different people coming in and out, maybe, dad is violent when he's using, whatever is going on, where this kid feels like I'm not safe here, or I don't want to be here. I'm going to take off and, I think I can be better off on my own. And then realizing I don't have anywhere to stay, or, maybe they couch surf, they hop around from friend to friend for a while and kind of come to the end of their, list of resources. And then now they don't have a way to pay for a place to stay. They, if they're 13, 14, 15, they can't go get a job. They don't have a way to pay for food. So what does that kid have to trade as a commodity, to, quote unquote, purchase the things that they need? And so what we see a lot of times is somebody kind of coming alongside that kid and saying, hey, you can come crash with me. I'll take care of you. I'll look out for you. Oh, by the way, now you owe me something. Right. So we also see this a lot with kiddos that are in the foster care system, that obviously if a kid is in the foster care system, there's been some sort of vulnerability, some sort of loss, right? And that may have been any and all of the above things that you named off. But that kid has some vulnerabilities, and that's what traffickers are looking for. They're looking to step in and fill a void for somebody. You need a boyfriend, I'm going to be your boyfriend. You need a family type figure in your life, I'm going to be that. You need a best friend, I'm going to be that. Right. So thinking about kiddos in the foster care system, they've already suffered some sort of a trauma, some sort of a loss, some sort of disconnection from, family of origin, typically. So it'd be really easy for somebody to come along and fill that void. And a lot of times those relationships start online through social media or things like that, or a kid, running from a foster placement, running from a group home. And then, like I said, ending up with somebody that, that intends to exploit them.
So you and I shared before we got started, I've been doing prevention work for now about a little over a decade, about 12 or 13 years. And I remember when there was a conversation evolving around human trafficking. And, I live in a fairly small city. It's not huge. And I remember thinking, surely that's not an issue. I think Chicago, LA, New York, Paris, Hong Kong, whatever, right. Dallas, but surely not in Southwest Missouri, or even where you are in Wichita seems to me like it's the Midwest. But what I've learned and what you're reaffirming here is that this is a way more prevalent issue, and it's way more complicated than people probably have often heard it said. This is prostitution, and or someone's been snatched in the park or something. But there's a lot more to that story that I don't think the public knows about. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're still fighting a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths, a lot of things that circulate on social media. But again, the reality is the really basic definition is an exchange of something of a sexual nature for something of value. And when we're talking about kids, that's all we have to have, is that exchange. With adults, we're looking for evidence of force, fraud, or coercion. So, adults can consent to things that kids can't. But if somebody is being exploited, if somebody is being forced or tricked or threatened into a situation, that's where it's going to cross into trafficking. And so when you think of that in terms of, I think a lot of people equate trafficking with maybe street level prostitution, but, an adult that is being forced to work in a strip club, that's trafficking. An adult that is being threatened or coerced into creating pornography, that is trafficking. It's an exchange of something sexual for something of value, and we have force, fraud, or coercion. So it is it's a much broader picture than what people think. And because so much of this is facilitated online, this happens in every community, in every state, all over the country. Yes, there are, just some cities have a higher population than others. So you're going to have, more occurrences of anything, right? Just because there's a bigger population of people. But we've had cases in rural Kansas, in small towns, cases with, a good kid from a good family that just got connected to the wrong person online. It doesn't discriminate, unfortunately. Yes, there are people that tend to be a little more vulnerable because of situations, but unfortunately, this is kind of equal opportunity as far as across age and gender and socioeconomic class and, race and ethnicity and all of that. So it happens everywhere.
Well, I appreciate you sharing. I mean, again, it's complicated. And on one side of this, I know that the work you're doing is along, trying to create awareness and then prevention. The other part is that if you come across people that are trapped in this cycle, that you have some resources that can be made available as far as assistance for them. So I'd like to kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about some of the major components that you have available. And you've already talked about going into the classroom. So can you talk a little bit about the curriculum that you have, and is that proprietary to where you're at? Could people, reach out to you and learn about how that curriculum came together if they're thinking about, presenting something like that in their area? How does that work?
Yeah, for sure. So our film content is brand new. We just finished editing everything this last fall. This spring semester is really the first semester that we've been back full force in the schools, and we are slammed, which is good. We're very happy to be back in the classroom after, a year and a half of Zoom and whatever else.
Right.
But so yes and no. We're still working through finalizing curriculum and things like that. And that's a big part of what our organization will be working on this summer. We're kind of guinea pigging the film content through the classrooms this spring and making adjustments as we go. And then we'll shore all of that up a little tighter over the summer. So yeah, definitely people can reach out to us and we can definitely look at options. I would like to see this available to kids in places other than, just where we are, and we can't be everywhere. So,
right.
So yeah.
So in addition to some of the material that you have, I'm a big fan of the having resources available, so to speak, in the palm of your hand. And you have also developed the ICT SOS mobile app. And so can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how, that's available for a download? How can people incorporate that into their prevention work?
Yeah, so it's pretty specific to Kansas, but there is some good information in there as well for people that are outside of Kansas. There's some red flags and indicators and how to report things and, some nationwide resources as well. But when we first started going into the schools, I very naively spent a whole lot of time putting together a full color trifold brochure that every kid was going to stuff in the bottom of their backpack and never look at again. And so we figured out pretty quickly that anything paper was not gonna be helpful, but they always have their phones. And so we developed a mobile app, a very simple version of it a couple of years ago. And then we actually just re-released a much more professional version than the version that I built. We worked with a developer, and now that resource guide is statewide. It used to be just Wichita, but it's statewide. But then there's also a tab on there where kids can go and see where to report things. So things like the cyber tip line through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Crime Stoppers, some of the ways that they can report things anonymously if they want to. All of those things are listed in there as well. So we're really excited to this. Like I said, this semester, we're really kind of back full force and rolling that out and having kids download that on their phone. And then that way, if they never need it, great. But if they ever do, it's like you said, it's in the palm of their hand because they don't go anywhere without their phones.
Plus, I could see, if I reflect back to being the age group that you're talking about, trying to be in front of, the anonymity of it all. Here's something I can look at that no one knows that I have, or that I can read about later. Not even my friends need to really know that I have it. So I mean, that really can be very powerful if it's in the right hand.
Absolutely. So we have a student advisory board of high school students that work alongside us, and they actually just created a poster to put in, school bathrooms and things like that has a QR code that you can just scan from your phone and it will take you to download the app. So you can do it without anybody seeing or hearing or knowing that you're downloading it. And then, like I said, that resource guide is not just things for human trafficking. It's, Safe Place is a national program that works with homeless and runaway youth. There's services on there for LGBTQ youth, for drug and alcohol services, for sexual assault services, DV services, all kinds of things. So suicide hotline. So really, really good information. Our kids are struggling right now. Coming out of this pandemic, being back in the schools and hearing the conversations, hearing the things that kids are concerned about, that they've been exposed to, things that have happened with these kids over the last couple of years. They're struggling. And we know that they go to each other first with things. And so, we kind of pass it off to them as, you may never need this, but if a friend ever comes to you and needs something, you're going to know where to be able to direct your friend. And they really connect to that because they really do want to be able to be there, for a friend or a classmate if they need something. And so we kind of sneak it in that way, like you won't ever need it, but if somebody else does, you'll have it. And then, and then they have that information.
Right. Great. Well, then on the other end of that, some of this is, it's very educational. It can help with, prevention efforts. But then on the other side, you've also kind of pioneered what you call the Fresh Start Bag. And can you talk a little bit about how that's utilized primarily by I know you probably have other channels, but primarily by your organization and the service that it provides?
Yeah, I love that you call it pioneered. It's so funny. It's a duffel bag of clothes. It's not rocket science, but it honestly is one of the most practical and most appreciated things that we do by our partner agencies. So we work a lot with law enforcement, the foster agencies, the hospitals, things like that. And we provide these bags for them. So what it is a duffel bag it's basically like what you would pack for an overnight trip, right? So socks, underwear, sports bras, t-shirt, tank top, hoodie, yoga pants, shampoo, conditioner, body wash, all that good stuff. We do a fast food gift card in each bag, and then a journal and a pen in our teen and adult bags, and a toy and a storybook in our kids' bags. So, whatever avenue somebody kind of first comes into contact with a first responder, whether that's a social worker or a detective or a nurse, if they need that resource, we want that to be available for them. So like I said, it's very simple, but very practical. Everything we put in the bags is brand new. We leave the tags on everything. So when somebody opens that bag up, they know this is just for me. It's not hand-me-downs. I don't have to worry about if it's clean, because we do those for things like our sexual assault nurses. If somebody has to come in and have a sexual assault exam and maybe they need to take clothing for evidence, then, you don't want to have to worry about the next thing that you put on. Is that clean? Is it, where did it come from? So it helps to provide dignity and meet a really basic need in a really yucky moment of crisis for people. And it's, like I said, it's very simple, but very, very practical and very helpful.
Well, I thought, I said, when I said pioneering, but really I saved it kind of towards the end because that's really the human aspect of it. I mean, the other is technology, and it does help and it does have its purpose, but you're really making that touchstone that could be something that gets a young person's attention in a world where they've been abused, neglected, ostracized, whatever. And then here's somebody that's, actually being humane towards me. And so, that goes a long ways in this cycle that I think you find yourself trying to interrupt, because, you don't usually end up receiving a fresh start bag as a result of, things were just going swimmingly well in your life before receiving it. So that's a great resource. And I could imagine that there probably comes with a need for people to donate or, assist with that. So what we'll do, in addition to putting the link to your website, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll also put a link to both the Apple and the Google store. So if people are interested in the the app itself. And then I also thought we'll put your website with the link if people want to either maybe want to give, or maybe people want to learn about how they might replicate it. And it kind of explains that. I believe you said if they were on your site, they would see kind of what goes into it, and they'd have some idea of what it is we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a really easy project to duplicate. It's funny, I was kind of giving you a hard time about the pioneering thing, but people have reached out to me and said, we want to do this thing, but we don't want to steal your idea. And I'm like, no, please take it and steal it. It's a really easy thing that could be duplicated in any community. If somebody, wanted to reach out to their sexual assault center or their domestic violence center, or if you have an anti-trafficking organization or, an organization that's serving drug endangered children, right? Reach out to them and say, hey, we'd like to do this for you. Here's the list that we have, is this a good list? Are there things we need to change? Is there something else that you'd like to see in the bags? And it's a really, really easy thing to recreate. And I'm telling you, it is the most practical, but most appreciated. It really is just a very simple act of kindness in a moment for somebody who has not typically had a lot of kindness shown to them.
Yeah. Wonderful piece of work there. So as we start to wrap up, I'm curious, if you were to tell the audience that they needed to do 1, 2, 3 things now after we've had this conversation, what would be your call to action for the audience as we kind of wrap up?
So one of my very favorite people in the world is our Internet Crimes Against Children Sergeant, Jeff Swanson. He's amazing. And I have him on panels and things like this all the time. He's kind of a rough around the edges Mr. Rogers, now that I think about it. But I adore him. But I have him speak for community events and things with parents, and people will often ask him, thinking back to the fact that most or a lot of our trafficking situations start online. We saw a huge uptick in online exploitation reports when the world shut down, and that has stayed really high. People will ask him, well, what can I do to keep my kids safe? What can I do to watch what they're doing online? Or is there an app I need to download? Or how do I, hack into their phone or whatever, right? And so you would think he would have this very technical answer, right? Coming from the Internet Crimes Unit. And every time somebody asks this question, he gets very animated and he pounds his hand on the table and he says, sit down and have dinner with your kids.
Yes.
Know what they're doing, know who their friends are, know what they're into and what they're excited about and what they're worried about, and have that conversation with them. Because if you don't, they will find somebody that will. And that person may not have the best of intentions for them. And I think the best thing we can do to insulate not only kids, but each other, we're wired for connection. And if we don't have those connections, we seek them out. And what we see with our kids is they seek them out in ways that are not always healthy. And so the more we can wrap around kids, the more we can provide a safety net and those points of connection for them, the harder it is for somebody else to break into that and get into their inner circle, right? So sit down and have dinner with your kids. That's my advice.
That's a great call to action, and I'm hoping that maybe we're experiencing more and more of that when we did spend more and more time together during the pandemic as a family. So hopefully we're turning the corner on kind of that family time together again for the first time, maybe for a lot of people in a long time, if ever. So good piece of advice. Well, Jennifer, I appreciate your time spent with us. And like I said, we'll include some contact information in the show notes for people if they're interested in learning more about the work that ICTSOS does. But thank you so much for being our guest here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And thanks for the work that you're doing. I think if more people would focus on prevention of a lot of things, maybe we could work ourselves out of some of these jobs.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I don't need job security in this realm. I'll find something else to do. You know,
Yes.
You can work me out of a job any day of the week.
We'll go rescue sea turtles or puppies or something, right?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for listening to this Mid-America PTTC podcast. To learn more about any upcoming trainings, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.